Hi folks,
Nate.
welcome, and thanks for everybody for coming out tonight. It's good to see everybody. Tonight our presentation is going to be done by Grant Giesbrecht, known as Dr. Popsicle, but I'm not going to introduce him. I'm not going to steal his thunder. He's going to be introduced by is it Dr. Ian? Okay, it's Ian Gilson from the Canadian Safe Boating Council. And I'm going to call him up in a minute. But first I just want to mention, you guys that know me have known I've been paddling for a very long time. I've certainly had my share of spills and dumps, and this water out here is kind of frigid. And I thought I was okay and knew what I needed to know to survive and be good in cold water until I saw some of his workshops and training that I found online. And I was really surprised at how much I didn't know. And one of the most important things, as everybody understands, for kayaking is safety. That has to be number one issue. Without it, you're in trouble. So would you please welcome Ian, who's going to do the introduction. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As Fred mentioned, my name is Ian Gilson. I'm a director with the Canadian Safe Boating Council, which, if you're not familiar with us, we've been around since the early 1990s. We're a national boating safety organization wanting to make sure as best we can that we help all varieties of boaters, be it paddlers right through to power boaters, to do so more safely, more responsibly, and to derive more enjoyment out of the whole activity. Boating is one of the most widely enjoyed activities, so we again want to make sure that we can reach out to the boaters, anyone who plies our Canadian waters, to do so safely. Now, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak with you this evening. We seldom turn down an opportunity to talk about the dangers of cold water immersion, so we're very happy to be here this evening. As a matter of fact, we have made boating safety education one of our 5 key platforms of our educational efforts since about 2010, I guess, where we've done workshops, in-person workshops, right across Canada, as far as from Victoria right through to St. John's, all through the provinces, north in the Yukon and in the Northwest Territories. So we've tried to get as much penetration as we possibly can there. And with the advent of COVID, we turned our efforts relating to our cold water workshops to a virtual platform, and we've had great success there too, where we've had people join our virtual workshops right from the Yukon right through to the South Island of New Zealand. So we've been very fortunate to have that level of interest to drive our efforts. And we've been doing this, as I mentioned, since about 2010, and we've had the great fortune since then to work with Dr. Giesbrecht, who has been a real strong ally in our efforts to get our cold water education out. He's dedicated his whole life to the education of people, educating people about the dangers of cold water immersion and any other cold-related injuries. And with that, I'll ask Gord to come up to the podium and do his presentation.
All right, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Fred. And thank you to CISAC for the kind invitation. So, I'm going to have to end this presentation. Turn the lights out maybe a smidgen too early, but I'm okay. I got it. Maybe. There we go. So we're doing 2 cold water workshops, or 2-day workshops. One here in Victoria, day 2 is tomorrow, and then we're going to Vancouver to do it. And so when we talk to organizers here as to what kind of things should we talk about, can you hear me at the back? Okay. Yep. Okay. Perfect. we've got a long list, which was basically the entire roster of what we talked about over 2 days. So basically, I've carved out some important topics that I think relate specifically to paddlers, and we'll see how it goes. And basically, whenever I talk to any group about going out into wilderness or anything that's risky at all, I talk about thinking about 3 Ps. And that is, first of all, prepare for the reasonable worst case scenario. And I think we've all heard some of that, but we're going to give you some information today. Maybe some of it's new, maybe all of it's new for some of you. You should know that virtually all of what I'm going to tell you is backed up by research and or experience. You basically want to do the best you can for the reasonable worst case scenario. There's some scenarios that you can prepare for. Of course, the second P is prevent. And of course, you want to prevent any incidents in the first place. Safety is number one, and the best thing about safety is preventing to get in trouble. But if you do have an incident, then you need to perform. You can learn all the stuff you want. You can buy all the right equipment you want. And I think I have it still in the slide, but if not, I'll say it now. A piece of emergency equipment is useless unless it's in your hand when you need it. And an emergency procedure is useless unless you remember it and perform it properly when you need it. And one of the problems is when we talk about incidents, we have panic sets in. We get even if it's not a real emergency, anytime we have heightened attention to some kind of untoward situation, not for everyone, but for a common response is basically not thinking clearly and forgetting all about whatever you've learned and forgetting about the piece of equipment you have sitting in your boat or whatever. And so the principles of this presentation are that any of the advice we talk about will work for most of the people, most of the scenarios, most of the time. In groups like this, there's often the what if people. Well, what if this happens? What if that happens? There are scenarios where a number of bad things happen, and for you, it's just a bad day. It doesn't matter what the advice is. But most of the time, this stuff will work. So our target group, when we're talking, when we give these courses, is basically this group here. This is up in Alaska. This water is 10 degrees C, so it's a beautiful sunny day. They're wearing light clothing. Nobody's wearing life jackets, and if you look in closely, you can't see that if there's probably no life jackets in there at all. And they're just saying, beautiful day, what could go wrong? Well, it's 10-degree fast-moving water, that's what. And what nobody here knows is around the bend is a big rock sticking out in the water, and there's a boat wrapped around it. And hopefully they won't hit that boat or end up in the water. But I want you to remember this picture, because I'm going to show you later on, I'm going to show you a video of Megan, who the next day in this river jumps in this water. And when you watch her response and how she does, think about all of these people if they ended up in the water like she was. So it's relevance to you as a potential victim. You're out paddling. Some of you might end up being a rescuer, either because of somebody you're with, or did anybody here work with search and rescue at all? Okay, so a few of you, yeah, and some of you might pass this on, even informally to people as an educator. You don't have to be standing in front of a group like this to be an educator, right? Just telling anybody, passing relevant information on can be very important. And so here's where we talk about, and one of the key issues with the Safe Boating Council is cold water and awareness of what happens in cold water. So this is just an interesting graph. That's data from the States. So just take a zero off and it'll probably work for the numbers will be very close to here. But the principle is exactly the same. Blue is the number of boating incidents in a year. Oh, actually, I can use this now. The number of boating incidents in different water temperatures. Right? And so there's a lot more boating incidents at this water at 15 to 25 degree water temperatures. That's not because that's more dangerous water, it's because there's many more boats on the water. That just makes sense. But what's important here is if you look at the deaths per boating incident, and I've just redone this to show this as fatalities as a percent of boating incidents. And as you can see, when the water temperature is warmer, it's 14%. of boating incidents and in fatality. But in cold water, 10 degrees and lower, 40%. And depending on the year, some years it's even much higher than that. And the issue here is it's cold water. And it's not because people have worse accidents in cold water. It's because when they have their accident, they end up in cold water. So cold water is a big problem. So just gonna, if you've heard anything, any of my stuff, don't answer the question. But if you haven't, I want to know just what comes to your mind. What number comes to your mind first? So if you fall in ice water or 0-degree water, with whatever the winter clothing you'd be wearing at that time, how long do you think it'll take to become hypothermic? Just throw out the numbers. What do you? 10 minutes. What was the first one I heard? 7. Okay. And 2. There's 2. Yeah. 5. 20. We're not going to get into all the BMI. It does depend on BMI. What do you got? 3 minutes? What's that?
1 minute.
Okay, so there we go. We had a 20 and a lot of shorter answers. So we're going to get to, so here's, when I, for 2 years, I talked to groups like this, and in medical conferences, whatever. And so before every talk I gave for 2 years, I gave a 5-question questionnaire. This was one of the questions. And these were the answers that we got from 680 people, respondents over 2 years. And the percentage of respondents who said, 50% said 0 to 5 minutes. So that's about what we had here. You're an average group. Congratulations. Good job. And another 20% said 6 to 10 minutes. So, there we go. Interesting. Okay, so almost 3/4 of the respondents said they thought it'd take 10 minutes or less. As I'm going to show you in a few minutes, that's impossible and we're talking about adults now. None of us in this room will be hypothermic in 10 minutes or less. And only 4% got it right, and that's 30 minutes or more. This is a really important point, and I try to drive this home. Now, does it really matter how long it takes? Well, yes, it does. Because everybody knows if you fall in cold water, you're going to get hypothermic, and if you get hypothermic, you can die from hypothermia. And if it can happen, and everybody, many people know it can happen in minutes, 1, 2, 3 minutes. We've heard all those answers, right? And so if you, I'll just ask you, if you fall in cold water unexpectedly, and you think that you can become hypothermic in 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes, what are you likely to do? Panic. And panic very seldom improves your decision-making process. So it's important to know this. I'm going to hit this a couple of times tonight. Understand falling in cold water without thermal protection on is dangerous. It's painful. You feel terrible, and you can die, but you're not going to become hypothermic for a long, long time. We'll find out, we'll see how you can die very quickly, but not from hypothermia. Okay, so this is, I'm just going to show you this. Now, somebody's going to say, what about all the factors? What about temperature and BMI and stuff like that? This is just an example of core temperature from 37 degrees, and this is time over 90 minutes. And there's a couple of important parts of this, and then we're going to kind of move into some of the relevant stuff here. But, well, this is relevant because this is not a mistake here. This core temperature, it's not a trick for your eyes. The core temperature is actually rising. And if we measured your core temperature and we all jumped in the harbor out here, every one of you, your core temperature would rise. Core temperature being heart, lungs, and brain would rise anywhere from 1 to a few tenths of a degree, and it wouldn't get back to normal for 5 to 15 minutes before you actually started getting a colder core temperature than when you started. Now, of course, the heat content in your body is going down because you're in cold water, but your core temperature will go up. So you cannot become hypothermic in minutes unless you fall in liquid nitrogen, but there's not much of that around. Okay, so it takes about half an hour before your core temperature gets, so this, and again, these are an average textbook numbers, so you can put some numbers to something. There's variability depending on water temperature and individuals, but the point is half an hour is 30 minutes, is not 3 minutes, okay? So the upper the threshold for mild hypothermia is 35. So it's going to take you about half an hour to become mildly hypothermic, and normally people don't die from mild hypothermia. It will take about an hour before your core temperature gets down to about 30, and 30 is the temperature at which you become unconscious, which of course, if you're in cold water, that's not great unless you have a PFD on. If you did have a PFD or something else that's able to keep your airway out of the water, you're still not dead yet, because your heart won't stop till your core temperature gets down to around 28. So another reason why PFDs are so important, because you won't be, as we're going to see, and probably many of you or some of you have experienced, you can't be functional very long, or your functionality decreases a lot when you're in cold water. Okay, and by the way, this is very informal. If you have a question, throw up your hand or just say, hey, I have a question, in case I don't see it. Yes?
Yeah, are you using 0 degrees as your water temperature now in all of these? Or?
No,
No.
Just really cold water. But we said, you know, the question was in ice water, so just think, you know, 0-ish, but it doesn't really matter. If it's 5 degrees, it'll take you a little bit longer to cool off, so it's even more than half an hour, right? If it's 10, it'll take even more than that. And again, the 30 minutes is variable. I don't want you to get hung up on temperature and times. The point is, it's 30 minutes-ish, not 3 minutes. You fall in cold water, even if it's out here in the middle of winter in the ocean when the water's -4, you will not become hypothermic in minutes. You can die quickly if you do the wrong thing, but not of hypothermia. That's my main point. So most cold water deaths happen due to drowning at a perfectly normal thermic temperature, and few cold water deaths happen due to hypothermia. I mean, I tell people, if you fall in cold water, you'll be very lucky, you'll be very fortunate to live long enough to die of hypothermia. Because as you can see, it's 90 minutes or 2 hours. And if you survive that long, you've got some other things going for you, like you had a PFD on, you're hanging onto a boat or something else. So why is hypothermia overestimated? Now, I'm not throwing this group under the bus here. This is, excuse me, this is U.S. rowing, an old U.S. rowing video. I'm just going to summarize 2 slides for you. And now, to their credit, they asked me, they showed me this stuff, and they asked me to help them update their information. They no longer show this video. But, you know, this is the stuff that we listened to all through the 70s and 80s. You know, they said this gal has just fallen out of her skull, and she will become hypothermic in minutes. She's not going to become hypothermic in minutes. That's impossible. And the other thing that's interesting is they made a big deal about if you don't have a hat on, you can become hypothermic. And I'll just tell you, if you look at this gal, she's in, let's say she's in 5-degree water from the shoulders down. Her head is exposed to cold air. It doesn't really matter what temperature it is. Where do you think most of her heat is being lost from? From her body in the water. Her biggest problem is not that she doesn't have a toque on. Her biggest problem is that she's in cold water. So she's got to, given a choice, she wants to get as much of her body out of the water as possible. And, you know, there's not going to be a toque around anyway, so unless she had it, well, even a wet toque would help. So if she had one in her pocket, great, but unlikely this situation. So that's that. I'm going through some introductory stuff. This usually will take a lot longer in the course, but it's interesting to know about temperature regulation. How do we respond? Because it actually can help us understand how cold we are or how cold our partners are. And yeah, so here we go. So basically our temperature regulation system is like a thermostat. We could find it somewhere on the side. There's one over there on the wall. There's a thermocouple in there that's telling the temperature of the room. And this here, so this is it. Our brain has one of these, but it's just much more complicated. But the idea is somebody set the temperature in this room for 25 degrees. This is the temperature in the room, 22 degrees. So we have a controller that's set at about 37 degrees Celsius. We want to keep our core around that temperature. And you know, we have skin receptors and core receptors that are integrated to tell us how close we are to that temperature. In this case, the temperature of the room is too cold. So you can see there's a little flame here. This tells you that the furnace is on to try and warm the room up to get to the temperature that it's set at. This is what our body does. If we're warm, we try to, if we're too warm, we try to cool off. If we're too cold, we try to warm up. And so on this side you have, we'll just quickly touch on this. If you have the warm body, warm environment, the first thing that happens is we have vasodilation, which is increasing blood, vessels dilation, get bigger, so increasing blood flow to the skin. And our skin is just like a radiator. You walk by a radiator, you feel heat emanating out of there. Like if you walk by there when it's on, you'll feel that. So if you have an increase in blood flow to the skin, you increase your heat loss. And and the other thing is, after that, then we start sweating. And the main reason we sweat is so that liquid, how the body understands this, hard to figure, but we sweat by putting liquid on our skin. And if that water evaporates, that takes heat, and the heat that's taken to evaporate that water comes from our skin. So that's why when you have water on your sweat or other water on your skin and it evaporates, you feel cooler because it's sucking heat out of your body. When it's warm, that's great. When it's cold, that's not so good. That's why I spend a lot of time trying to teach people, when you can, stay as dry as you can when you're in the cold, either air or water. Okay, so now if you're cool, we do the opposite. We walk over here, turn off the tap, and we have vasoconstriction, so we decrease the flow through that radiator. You come by there 10 minutes later, you're not feeling the heat anymore. There is no more heat loss. And the opposite of sweating for us is shivering. And that's, how many of you have shivered in your life? Good, okay, good, everybody. Should be everybody. Yeah, so it's just, it's involuntary muscle exercise. We all know that if you exercise, if you're cold, you go run around the parking lot or do some jumping jacks, and all of a sudden you feel warmer because when we do exercise, part of the energy we use is given off as heat. And so if we're not doing exercise, the body says, well, you're lazy, we're going to start shivering, and you start shivering. Now, we're all producing about 100 watts of heat. And you can shiver. The colder you get, the more the stimulus is, like the farther you get from the set point on your thermostat, the hotter the furnace will be, the more you shiver. And you can actually increase your heat production 3 to 5 times your resting rate. So you can produce 300 to 500 watts of heat. And that basically, I don't know what it sounds like to you, but shivering that much is like this. It's extreme shivering, extreme heat production. And the reason we do it is to prevent becoming hypothermic, or at least slow the onset of hypothermia. And another thing that's really important is once we get someone out, if we're rescuing someone, we get someone out of the cold, that 300 to 500 watts can help power rewarming. If we can insulate the people, the victim, and let them shiver, that's fantastic. Okay, so here, this is a question for you. It's an arbitrary. You would never probably do any of these, but if this was your choice, what would you give to a cold patient? First of all, you'd only give something to eat or drink to a mildly hypothermic patient who is alert and not going to choke. And so what would you, if you had a choice, I want you all to vote on something. I'll tell you the 3, then I'll ask, and I want everyone to put your hand up for something. Okay, so a hot or warm glass of water, a cool beer, or ice cold Coke. How many think you should give the hot water? How many would give the hot water? Okay, how many would give the cool beer? I joke that many of you are thinking that, but you don't want to admit it. And how many of you think the cold soft drink? So the cold soft drink probably won by a few percentage. And so why cold soft drink is the right answer? Why? Sugar. Calories, energy to help fuel shivering. The hot drink, if you do the calculations on this, you can drink 1 or 2 glasses of the warmest drink you can get down. And that's not going to change your core temperature more than a couple of tenths of a degree. You know, 2 glasses is half a kilogram. And your body, I won't tell you how much my body weighs, but let's say a body weighs 80 kilograms, putting in half a kilogram of whatever is not going to change the temperature very much. But, you know, that was an arbitrary choice. Of course, the best choice would be a warm chocolate drink or a warm drink that has lots of calories in it. So, you know, unless you're diabetic, the diet drinks you should leave aside when you're going out in the wilderness, especially in the cold, because if you need something, you need calories. So the warm chocolate is good because calories will help fuel shivering, and but the heat does provide psychological support. And I think we've all heard some version of, you know, one of the keys to survival is your mental outlook. So if you can feel better, that's going to improve everything. However, know that that is not increasing your core temperature. Okay, so now we're going to get to how does your body use heat, and then we're going to get to the practical stuff in just a few minutes. So we've just gone through 2.5 hours of class this morning. So we're moving here. So core temperature results from the balance between heat gain and heat loss. Okay, so we've talked about heat gain. You know, right now we're all producing 100 watts of heat. You can increase heat production through either voluntary exercise or involuntary shivering, or you can actually add some external heat to yourself. And then there is heat loss. How do we lose it? And basically there are 4 mechanisms. The first is conduction, you know, through direct contact with a solid or a liquid. You sit in the snow, your bum feels cold, you're conducting heat directly to the snow. Okay, convection, flowing water or air removes heat. I think we all know about wind chill, right? That is, so if I take a thermometer, it's does it ever get to -10 here? It's 0 here, and I got a thermometer, and I'm out of the wind. It says 0, and I've got a bare hand. If I stick the thermometer out into the wind, what's the temperature on the thermometer?
Same.
0. It doesn't change. The air temperature is exactly the same temperature, but my hand feels colder because it's warmer than the air, and the wind is taking that heat away much faster. So we've all tried to get out of the wind, right? So that's convective heat loss. So, you know, well, that's somewhat relevant for you. You might be paddling in the wind, so you're increasing your heat loss. But if you're in water, like if you dump and you're in the water, you know, currents and waves and stuff, anything that moves that water by your body is going to increase heat loss through convection. Including if you have a wetsuit on. How many of you have worn a wetsuit in cool water? Whether you have one, yeah, okay. So you probably noticed that, so if you stay still, you get water in there, you feel cold, and then that water warms up because there is some insulation there. But as soon as you start moving and the water flushes through your suit, you feel a lot colder, right? So that's kind of the idea. Radiation through space by infrared radiation. Most of our heat right now is being lost. We're just radiating it off into this room. And evaporation, very important. When a liquid turns into a vapor, it only does that if heat is provided, and if it's on our body, that heat comes from our body. If we're in the desert, great, I'm trying to lose heat. If it's a cool day, that's not so good. It's not because I was sweating, but because I've got my clothes are wet or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to move to here. So how do we respond when we fall into cold water? There are 4 phases. There are 3 phases that will always happen if you stay in water long enough, and then the 4th phase sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. So now we're getting into the real practical stuff here. So first of all, it's important to differentiate between immersion and submersion. So immersion is your head is out of water, your airway is protected, and then as long as your head's out of water, you're going to cool, and hypothermia is a possibility. And the organ at risk in hypothermia is the heart. The heart gets down 28 or lower, it can stop, okay, which is not good for you. If submersion is head underwater, so the airway is underwater, therefore cold water drowning is the issue for you. And when you drown, the brain is the organ at risk. The brain is the organ that's most sensitive to loss to no oxygen, and also gets the worst damage and most irreversible damage. And we're not going to talk about cold water drowning, but so we're going to talk about cold water immersion, not submersion, the rest of the day. So there are 3 phases of what happens when you fall in cold water, and I think this is important to understand, to know what's going to happen to you. Other than the fact that I made a big point at the beginning of this, that you will not become hypothermic in minutes. It's going to take a while. So if you're worried about dying from hypothermia, which would cause you to panic, understand I will not become hypothermic right away. I will not die of hypothermia. I don't have to worry about that for a while. Don't panic. I know it's easier to say, it's easier said than done. But anyway, we have 3 phases, and one way to remember them, I think, is just to understand, if I fall in cold water, what gets cold first, and then what happens if I stay in the water. So the first thing that happens is my skin gets cold. If I stay in the water long enough, or for a number of minutes, that cold goes beneath the skin and my muscles and nerves get cold. And if I stay in even longer, more than 30 minutes, my core eventually will get cold and I'll have mild hypothermia, which of course can get worse. So these each correspond to the 3 different phases. So when your skin gets cold, that causes the first phase, which is the cold shock response. And I've got on there 1 to 2 minutes to remind me when I get home. And I keep saying it and always forget when I get back. I really should change it to 30 to 60 seconds. But it doesn't matter, it's seconds, right? Whether 60, 30, 90, doesn't matter. It's very short, but it's very intense, as you're going to see in a few minutes. And basically, generally it's gasping followed by hyperventilation, and there's also an increase in cardiac work. But this is a physiologic response that will stop in 30 to 60 seconds, unless you panic. If you panic, that causes hyperventilation, and that can just keep going until you basically pass out or lose your ability to do anything. Okay, so if I can survive longer than that 1 to 2 minutes, and my muscles and nerves get cold, muscles or nerves send the signal to your muscles, and your muscles do the work, and muscle and nerve fibers, as they get colder, they don't work as well. They don't send signals as well, they don't contract as well. So we have what's called cold incapacitation. And in this case, it'll kind of you start to feel numb and not being able to do fine motor movements and then gross motor movements. That'll start after a couple of minutes, and it'll generally get worse for about 20 minutes, and then you'll have the maximum effect and you won't be able to do very much. This is in 0 degree water. Obviously, if it's 5 degrees or 10 degrees, that can go longer. The point is, you have this uncontrollable breathing for seconds, and you have the ability to do meaningful work for minutes. So you can take the time to survive that first minute and get your breathing under control, and then you still have several minutes, like even 5 minutes is a long time when you're in cold water to try and figure out what you should do. Okay, and so weakness, incoordination, and again, more than 30 minutes, textbook number to become mildly hypothermic, and maybe an hour or more to become unconscious to hit that 30 degrees. Okay, so there's your 3 phases. The cold shock response, gasping and hyperventilation, cold incapacitation, weakness, and of course, in the water, that would be manifest as maybe swim failure, and then hypothermia. Oh, and core temperature takes about half an hour to go from 37 down to 35. Okay, so again, all of those numbers, there's some variability between people and at different temperatures, but the point is, cold shock response is, you can count them in seconds, 30, 60, 90. You start becoming incapacitated in minutes, and it's fractions of hours before you become hypothermic. So there it is. We've talked about these 3 phases. If you stay in the water long enough, you will go through these 3 phases in that order. Everyone will do that. There is a 4th phase called rescue collapse. It used to be called post-rescue collapse. Then we changed it to peri-rescue collapse and circum-rescue collapse. Then we said, oh, that's too complicated. Why don't we just call it rescue collapse? And that's what this is. And it is something that can happen just before, during, or after rescue. And the symptoms are anything from just falling down, not being able to stand up anymore, to fainting, to death. And so we would really like to eliminate that if we can. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So back to, I told you I would show you Megan. a few at the beginning of this. So remember, think about that group on that big blue slide with the 6 or 8 people standing up in the boat in this water, standing up with t-shirts on and no life jackets, not available, not in the boat at all. So if something happens to that boat, they're swimming. And now think about those people and what their chances would be after you watch Megan. Cool.
Rolling, go.
So her total time in the water was 2.5 minutes. We're gonna cut to the end of the swim run. But just know it's 2.5 minutes total. So this picture right here is a chilling picture for me. She is 4 feet from the edge of the water. She's in 6 inches of water. And can you hear me still? Yeah. Seems like this isn't on. Okay. And yet she says she can't move anything. She was swimming very well before she tried to stand up, and all of a sudden now she can't move anything. What phase have we just seen here? Well, look at that. How many think post-rescue collapse? How many think cold incapacitation? Okay, so that's what I thought. We were thinking live that was indeed cold incapacitation, but it's not. It's post-rescue collapse or rescue collapse. So remember, cold incapacitation is a decrease in function as your muscles and nerves get colder, and that's gradual. So there's nothing in there that would say all of a sudden something happens, right? You're just going to gradually get worse. This happened right now. She was swimming very well. In fact, she swam further than we thought she would. And then as soon as she stood up, she collapsed. So you saw the cold shock response and heard the cold shock response. And we didn't tell her what to do. She knew, she knew what video we were making, but we didn't tell her try to control your breathing or anything. So after about 40 seconds, within 3 breaths, she went from really loud hyperventilation to totally relaxed, controlled breathing. And that's just the end of the physiologic response. And so try to remember that. If you fall in cold water, unless you panic, that will end. That really terrible feeling will end. So I'm going to just play the rest of this because I have actually given a talk, started with this and ended up just talking about this the whole talk. So it's extremely valuable. So you've seen the cold shock response. You've seen how it dies off. And you've seen now rescue collapse. This is just, you could call it just prior to rescue or getting out. She fell down and that was it. And now we're going to bring her out and we're going to talk to her for a bit.
Oh, Dad! There's something insane. I couldn't control my breath. I couldn't do anything. And then all of a sudden, I could breathe again. Like it was like I hit a threshold. And then I could breathe, and it helped if I closed my eyes because I could concentrate on just my breath. And I don't know, I just kept swimming and now I can't feel anything.
You were swimming fairly decently once you got to the beach here.
Yeah, Once I could feel the bottom, it's just like my body gave up. That's it. I could have gone further though, if I hadn't hit the rocks.
So how can you explain it? You could have swam farther, but when you got to safe ground, you just collapsed. Can you explain that, or how it felt, or?
Oh, all of a sudden, I stopped thinking about my breath, because that's really all I was thinking about, was my breath, breathing. But once I hit the rocks, I knew that I didn't have to, I wasn't concentrating on my breathing anymore. And then I couldn't feel the rest of my body. Like that's when I started thinking about my arms and my legs and my torso and how absolutely freezing it was.
Okay, so it felt cold. Anything else? Pain, numbness?
Very painful. Not really numb, just, it felt like my whole body was on fire. Yeah.
Okay.
It still feels like it's on fire, actually.
And you couldn't get up?
No way. I couldn't move anything.
What were you saying there before they picked you up because they were just coming over here? Do you remember?
No.
Okay. You got up, you felt you collapsed, and you were felt like your whole body was on fire.
Yeah.
Anything else to add to that?
No, my brain's not working very well right now.
Okay, all right. And you look like you're starting to shiver.
Yeah.
You're just noticing that yourself? Describe what you feel like right now. Why do you feel different that you're starting to shiver, or is that just coming in?
Now it's less burning and more just really, really cold.
And you're shivering like crazy.
I'm cold.
All right.
Oh.
You think you can get up and walk?
Possibly. Can't really feel my feet.
You want to try?
So right now, all of her friends and her support group are standing behind me saying there is no way she can walk. You've almost killed her.
Really...
You just watch.
Let's take this off for now. And let's say you just swam up on the shore and can you get up?
My joints are really, really stiff. And I feel like I can't. I feel like I don't have muscle control. I feel kind of silly.
That's okay.
Oh. Yeah, if I crack my head on the rocks.
Just see a demonstration of.
It's really, like I have to concentrate on like trying to move my feet forward.
Someone help him back up.
Oh, it's really hard to move my legs.
So just walk over here. We're just going to see if we can make it over here.
Okay.
If you feel that you're feeling pain,
Oh.
just tell us.
Okay. Yeah, I can't imagine doing this in a real life situation. Or being all by yourself. Oh.
Very nice job.
Okay, so you see she's getting miraculous recovery, and that's because she wasn't that bad a shape in the first place, right? So she was in the water for 2.5 minutes. Now you know that her core temperature, if anything, would be a couple of tenths warmer than it was than when she got in the water. And so, first of all, if we don't get a chance to talk about how you might treat somebody who's cold, don't walk them around. Because the reason we're doing it here is because we know that she was in the water for 2.5 minutes, and her walking was not going to cause any significant problem. She'd already gone through the post-rescue collapse, and we wanted to show that this just indicates that she's not in bad shape But in real life, you don't do that. Okay, so when we make these videos, we're trying to accomplish a number of things all at the same time. So what do we learn from this? Well, the initial immersion, and I can't remember whether it was 8 to 10 degrees, really cold anyway. Rapid skin cooling caused a cold shock response. You saw gasping, hyperventilation, and it was hard to tell, but her swimming movements really were not that effective. All they did was basically get her head above water so that she could breathe while she was gasping and hyperventilating. But then, suddenly, I mean, it can't get any more dramatic than that. In 3 breaths, she goes from full speed to just normal. And at that point, her swimming movements were really good. And she swam much further than we thought. We never expected her to get to that beach. And then she says, when my feet hit the rocks, my body gave up. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So that's not cold incapacitation, because that's a gradual effect. This was a sudden effect. And it was a mild case of rescue collapse. And there are a number of mechanisms for this, of falling down, fainting, or dying. You're not going to die after 2 minutes, but if someone's been in the water for half an hour to an hour, maybe that becomes an issue. So when we're under stress, we pump out adrenaline or catecholamines. Certainly everybody's heard of adrenaline, and adrenaline does a couple of things. One, it helps you maintain blood pressure, or keeps your blood pressure high, and it also allows muscle, complicated physiology, doesn't really matter. The bottom line is, it allows your muscle fibers to do things you normally can't, right? When people get really stressed and they want to save somebody's life, they can lift something really heavy that they normally couldn't, right? We've all heard stories like that. So what happens is, one of the things that we're pretty sure happens just before, during, or after rescue is, you're fighting for your life, and all of a sudden there's a boat that's getting close, or you've touched the bottom, everything's okay, mental relaxation, decrease your adrenaline or catecholamine output, and 2 things happen. Your blood pressure drops, and your muscle fibers can't do what they were doing before, and that's exactly what happened for Megan. Another thing that happened, you notice, after I was talking to her for a while, she started shivering, like 1 or 2 minutes after she got out of the cold water. Why is that? Any ideas? Her skin is warmer. Yeah. Because it's, no, her skin is warmer. Evaporation would cool it off, but even if evaporation of the wet skin was cooling your skin relatively, she's still much warmer than when she was in the 8-degree water. Yeah.
Is she increasing blood flow to her extremities? So her core is starting to cool?
What's the first few words you said?
Increased blood flow.
Increase, yes, exactly. So this is called the after drop. So although her skin was warmer, her core was cooling after she got out. So everybody will have an after drop. Your core temperature will decrease after you get out of the cold. So this is important to know if you fall into water, or if a colleague falls in the water, and what happens after. Everybody will drop a few tenths of a degree. But if you do anything that increases blood flow to the legs have been, even though she's been swimming, the legs are much colder than the core, and all of these factors that we're cooling off, her legs cools the blood as it's flowing through. It comes back to the heart. Heart gets colder. If the heart gets colder, the brain gets colder. That's where the thermostat is, and it says, hey, we're still getting colder. Skin's warm, but the core is getting colder. We got to shiver. And anytime, anybody who's gone for more than a couple minutes swim in cold water, on purpose or not, you probably notice that after a while you start shivering. That's because your core temperature's going down. And then gradually you'll stop shivering because the shivering has warmed you up, and now you're back to normal again. Yes, sir?
If you were to compare this woman's response in 2+ minutes to our local swim dippers who go in for 5 or 10 minutes and they swim in the water that's as cold as that, and they come up ashore and they stand there. So how was it? You can't compare age.
Yeah, no, yeah.
That's a big difference.
The principle is there. So In the full course, I have a section on purposeful swimming in cold water. I took it out because this is for boaters. But, you know, one of the things that we advise, if you're into the cold water swims, I don't know why you would be, but anyway, if you are, I have too many of those T-shirts. I'm retired from that club. But anyway, it's you need to have somebody with you taking care of you, because you might, especially the more you swim, the longer you can go, the more trouble you can get in, and you might just pack it in the middle of a swim stroke. So you need to make sure that doesn't happen, but we warn people that when you get out, it's not over. Lots of stories of people collapsing on their way back to their vehicle, or getting into the vehicle and, you know, 5–10 minutes later, just shivering uncontrollably. And basically, there's not much you're going to do about that except ride it out, because as long as you're well nourished, the shivering will be enough to rewarm you. And just, you know, this is another reason why you want to have somebody with you to take care of you, not just to watch over you when you're in the water, but maybe they should be the ones driving home instead of you. Because, so that exact thing. And so people have collapsed, rescue collapse, or they've just shivered like crazy because they have an after-drop. So that does happen, yeah. Okay, so here we go. We've talked about all of that. Just a proportion of people, this is a study done a long time ago, but stats don't change too much. They looked at where they knew the causes of people who died in cold water immersion, and 56% were early, like remember I said, you're going to either cold shock response or cold incapacitation. He dove in and he never came back up. That's cold shock response. He was a really good swimmer. He tried to swim across this narrow river and he got halfway and he disappeared. That's cold incapacitation. Now this group is a little higher than I would have expected, 27% hypothermia, but 17%, that's 1 out of 6, died from post-rescue collapse or rescue collapse. So we tell people, you know, this is something you need to understand what's happening to your own body. If you're shivering like crazy, that's a warning. You should do something to either change something, more insulation, produce more heat, change your location, whatever, because that's, if you're shivering for a couple of minutes, no big deal. But if you're shivering like 5, 10, 15 minutes, that's a warning that something's wrong, you need to change your situation. So that's how that information can be relevant for you. And how it can be relevant for your neighbor is, you know, if you are with somebody during your trip and somebody falls in, they go for a swim, they've been in the water for 2 to 5 minutes, well, you know, even if they collapse on you, they're not going to die, right? But if you're responding to something, it's taking you a while to get there, well now, if they've been in the water 40 or 60 minutes, the effect of post or rescue collapse, it would be more than just falling down. It could be cardiac arrest. So that's very important to think about. One more point there. So what? What about all this stuff? We've talked about the 3 main phases of cold water immersion. And so how does that affect you if you fall into cold water? So I had the opportunity to go on the David Letterman show 20 years ago, this year actually. And colleagues of mine and I have been talking about how to, back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the 3 phases were kind of coming into vogue, and yeah, there are 3 phases. And we were thinking, we got to come up with a way to teach people, so what's the relevance of this? And getting on this show forced me to come up with something that I could capsulize in one short sentence, and here it is. It's the 1-10-1 principle. So this is February 20, 2004, and I'm in an ice tank on 53rd Street. Dave's talking to me. I've been in there for 13 minutes or so. We've already demonstrated the cold shock response. We've demonstrated that I can't get out onto, we call it the ice. There's a platform there, but we said, okay, it fell through the ice. And so here we go. What do you do? Now, very interesting. Our sound has been working up until now. Hang on. Okay? The devil is in all AV. Unbelievable. We've tested this, we've used it.
But there's still another hour. So if you were in this situation and you couldn't get out anymore, the best thing is not to thrash around, because that'll just kill you faster. Put your arms on the ice. Be
Here's what we're going to do.
Are you getting out now, Doctor, or are you staying in? No, if you'd like me to, I'd be happy to. Well, it's entirely up to you. Whatever you're comfortable with. And I use the word comfortable. And yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I don't think I've been in here long enough. Well, then you tossed him a rope. Okay, I can't get out. You can't get out. Well, here's the big message to people out there. You've got 1 minute, 10 minutes, 1 hour. Right. 1 minute to get control of your breathing, 10 minutes of meaningful movement, and it's been about 14 hours and I can't get out, but there's still another hour before you become unconscious due to hypothermia. So if you were in this situation and you couldn't get out anymore, the best thing is not to thrash around, because that'll just kill you faster. Put your arms on the ice, be still, and it'll sound silly, but if you're lucky, you'll freeze to the ice. And then if you become unconscious, you won't slip into the water and drown. Right. Because after you become unconscious, if you don't drown, you'll still be another hour before your heart would stop. Wow. Now, has this ever happened to you, Doctor? No, it hasn't, but I know of a few people who've had either their arms frozen to the ice or even their beard frozen to the ice and lived. So anyway, if you
So
don't
it sounds
mind,
funny,
I wouldn't mind if my
but
colleague
this is
Jerry
why
Bristow helped me get out of
it's
here.
important to recognize about the cold incapacitation phase. As long as you're getting colder, your muscles and nerves are getting colder, you will never get strong. You will never get stronger. Okay? So if you're trying the same thing, a couple times you need to practice a bit, that didn't work, now I'm going to keep trying it and it's still not working, and now I'm finding that I'm trying it again and again, and I'm becoming less and less, even more unsuccessful. I'm never going to get any better. So I need to stop and think, okay, I can't get up on the ice, I can't get back in the boat, whatever it is I'm trying to do, what can I do to widen the window of opportunity for someone else to come and rescue me? If I'm in ice water, for instance, if I just keep flailing around, I'm going to drown and that's it. Disappear, no one will find me. If I could be frozen to the ice, which is not an issue here, I could be, tie myself to a boat. People have done that and survived. At least someone knows where to find me. If I'm dead, at least my family can bury my body. But more importantly, just because I'm unconscious or incapacitated, I'm still a long way away from my heart getting cold enough to stop, as long as I don't drown. So that's why we talk about doing that. Okay, so we've talked about that. So this is it, the 1-10-1 principle. And each of these relates to one of the phases, right? So if you fall in cold water, do not panic, because you've got 1 minute to get your breathing under control, 10 minutes of meaningful movement, and an hour before you become unconscious due to hypothermia. The other thing about that, I just remembered this gal that we had a course that we were teaching when it comes to the rescue collapse. We were teaching a university group. I think it was somewhere between 12 to 18 students. I can't remember. It's a long time ago now. And we had, every class has one of those students. One of those. It's always, having the problems or whatever. Well, in this case, it happened to be a gal. Their canoe dumped, and she went for a fairly long swim in white water, cold water, and we finally got everything into sort of shallow water, and she was sitting in water up to about here, and she was just sitting there, and people are getting her boat and emptying it out and getting everything else, getting all the pieces and finding it all and getting it on shore. And we're going, okay, Irene, I remember her name. I'll never forget. Oh, there it is. I haven't thought of this name for years, but Irene. There we go. Irene, stand up. And she, I can't stand up. She was just kind of just being kind of dopey there and sitting there. And I thought at the time she's just playing the role. Looking for sympathy and all this. And we're yelling and screaming at her. And finally, I think somebody got out of the boat and walked over and sort of helped her up. But now knowing what I know, that was not her, making trying to get sympathy or anything. She wasn't making anything up. That was a mild case of rescue collapse. She literally couldn't stand up, just like Megan couldn't get up when she was lying in 6 inches of water. So, if somebody's been in, and certainly that wouldn't have been more than 5 minutes. We wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have taken us anywhere near that long. It was more like 2-3 minutes. And so when you're with someone, and they're not looking so good, and even if it's a short immersion, just think about Irene and Megan, and maybe help them out instead of yelling and screaming at them and saying, "Just get up, you lazy lunt." I didn't say that to her, but we were all thinking it. We were all thinking it. Okay, so I think I'm gonna show you this, and then I'm gonna just talk about a paper that we published related to here, and that should do it. So after one of these talks, this is not him, but this represents him and his son. Ottawa policeman came up to me and said, "Hey, you saved my life." And I said, "Oh, how did I do that?" And he said he told me this story. So he was out on a sunny spring day. So that's warm air, cold water, right? So him and his son, only his son, of course, is wearing a life jacket because adults don't need life jackets apparently. And a valuable item fell overboard, and without thinking, he dove in to get it. And then he learned that the water was very, very cold. So he came up, and he was facing the boat. He said his mouth was open, and he couldn't move, and he couldn't breathe, and he was just like frozen there. And he said he had two thoughts. The first one was, am I really going to drown in front of my son? And his second thought was, he had obviously seen or heard one of my talks before. He said, I heard your voice saying, don't panic, just get your breathing under control. Okay, so I don't care if you hear my voice, but remember the message. If you're having trouble soon after you get out of the water, right? The 1-10-1 principle is, you have 1 minute to get your breathing under control. And how do you do that? You can just force yourself to take a couple of slow, deep breaths, and that will break that cycle. And if it doesn't, as long as you're not panicking, that process is going to end in 40 to 60 seconds, guaranteed. So we tell people, if you can just survive the first minute, you have increased your chance of survival in a huge way. Okay, so he took the slow, deep breaths, swam back to the boat, and never did tell his wife about his problem. And I told him, if I see you again, I'm going to ask you, and the answer better be yes. Are you wearing a life jacket when you're in a boat? So I'm just gonna go. There's a lot of stuff that's covering the same thing here, but I just want to, because we're here in Victoria, and many of you have heard of John Hayward. He was a professor here at the University of Victoria. How many of you know the name John Hayward? Okay, not many. Okay, so good thing I'm here to remind you of a great Victorian. He was a prof here, and he retired in the early 90s, just as I was starting my career. So we did some stuff together, and this was the last paper that his name was on in publication. And this is related to how many of you have heard of or remember the rowing scull that dumped here in Elk Lake? 9 people, 2 of them died. Okay, so that's a few more of you. And so John and I wrote a case study up about this, and there were 9 people on the team. So this story tells a lot of things about variability and about the different things that can happen when you end up in cold water when you've been paddling. Of course, these folks, it was 4-degree water when they dumped. They did, of course, they're rowers, so they don't have any PFDs in the boat. They don't have them on or in the boat. And so they were in the water for 15 minutes. Once they were rescued and put in a boat, it was another 13 minutes in it was like 2 to 3 foot waves, so very choppy, 13-minute ride, very bumpy, breaking the gentle rule. And so what happened to these rowers? So there was one rower who actually weighed quite a bit, and he, as soon as the boat, the rescue boat arrived, he let go of the boat and drowned. So there is your short-term rescue collapse. Now there's 8 left. And there were three rowers that were, you know, lighter than the rest, and 5 that were kind of a moderate build. And those 5, they had a hot shower when they got back, and they went home. But the 3 lightest ones, they all had big problems. And 2 of them, so how'd this work out? I want to make sure I get this right. It doesn't really matter. One of them, so 2 of them had to have their core temperatures were down like 25 and 23. So, and their hearts were still pumping. So they were treated aggressively in the hospital, and they warmed up and survived. And one of them, his core temperature was down around 25 as well. And as soon as he was strong enough, he was awake or conscious when the boat arrived. He was conscious as he got into the boat. By the time they got him to the boat shed, he was unconscious and asystotic, or his heart was, he was in cardiac arrest. And they took his core temperature, was in the 25s, and he died. So two of them died. One immediately in cold shock, a heavier guy, and a lighter guy that actually lived longer but died because he cooled more than the rest. So the 3 thinner people cooled the most. They're the ones who went to the hospital, and 2 out of 3 of them, only 2 out of 3 of them survived. So it's a very interesting case, and I can make it available and you can pass it around. It's a short read, and it's not too much jargon in it. So I think there's a lot to learn there about the physiology, the variability, and things to think about when you are rescuing somebody, if you happen to be rescuing a friend or whatever, when you're out on a trip. And if you have 2 to 3 foot waves, then, you know, we teach stuff. We go, here's the principles and here's why you want to be doing that. And then we realize that when the rubber hits the road or the paddle hits the water, you know, that doesn't always work. So obviously, if you're in a storm with 2 to 3 foot waves, you are not taking a gentle ride back to the boathouse. And that probably killed one of them. So it's just more reason that if there's a possibility, you want to be as gentle as possible. And so there you go. So you know, the main thing is you're not going to become hypothermic in minutes. 1-10-1 principle. If you fall in cold water, don't panic. You've got 1 minute to get your breathing under control, 10 minutes of meaningful movement, and 1 hour before you become unconscious. And if you're taking care of somebody who's been cold, just remember you would like to minimize any possibility of post-rescue collapse. And so that can be done by being gentle and keeping them as horizontal as possible and not dragging them around, and that will increase their chance of survival. And as you're thinking about yourself, if you are shivering for a couple of minutes, whatever. But if you're shivering on an extended basis, 10, 15 minutes, that's a major, even if you're sitting in your boat and you're not cold water immersed, that's a warning to you that you have to do something. Either increase your clothing, change the environment, or do some more work, or whatever. You should not be shivering for 15 minutes. That's a sign of something's going wrong. So with that, I will end. Thank you for the invitation, and close with my final piece of advice, which is keep cool, but don't freeze. Thanks.
Question?
Yeah, I am available for questions if you want. So I'll answer questions until I get the hook. Shoot.
We all wear immersion gear and PFDs. Does that mitigate the effects of hypothermia?
Yeah, absolutely. So any kind of thermal protection is a great idea. So although we have heard just on our way here about people who get in trouble and they're not wearing immersion suits. You know, the people who bought who went to go shopping at Costco and came out with a kayak and you know, don't know what they're doing. But so there's a difference between wetsuits and dry suits, right? Wetsuits are insulation; they work, but a dry suit is much better. I'll take a thin dry suit over a thick wetsuit any day. So yes, it does make a difference. Yep.
Could you say that again?
He's hard of hearing.
The part about I would take a thin dry suit over a thick wetsuit any day? I would, absolutely. Yes?
Yeah, as part of that, I've never had a dry suit that's dry, and they usually leak awfully. I find, like if I go surfing in my boat out to Jordan River, I wear a wetsuit. If I think I'm going to be in the water from time to time, I want my wetsuit on. Dry suit, I just do not trust to keep me.
Yeah, so if you're surfing, okay, so we've been talking about boating when you're not planning to be in the water, right? So you're surfing, surfing. You're going to be in the water. So now there is a problem if you have a wetsuit on, it's always tight. You have a finite amount of water. It might move around, and it might, as it flushes through your suit, it might make you feel colder. The problem with a dry suit is if you're planning to be in the water a lot, it leaks in and doesn't go out. So now your suit can fill up, and that could be a problem. So again, it depends on what you're doing. So it's the lawyer's response. It depends. Yeah. So if I'm well, I don't do cold water surfing, but I would certainly start with my dry suit and assume it will leak very little, if at all, until proved otherwise. But I can understand if you have an older suit that is leaking, then a wetsuit might indeed have a. So we understand the principles, all right? We if you try both of them out, if you have both, and see which one works better for you. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Was there somebody right over here? No?
It was the same question.
Okay, so shoot.
I think the challenge for us kayakers who paddle all year long is the incapacitation. Because I know, even in the wintertime when I'm paddling, my hands are already cold. And I actually thought about this, like, oh my God, if I fall in the water, these hands aren't going to help me.
Yeah.
And so then it's up to our colleagues to get us into our boat. And I don't know if we ever really practice with the person who you're rescuing being incapacitated and getting them into a boat. It's hard enough sometimes even for the person who's not incapacitated.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a perfectly good thing to practice, for sure. Yeah. And your hands, so we've been talking about, yes, fine motor movements, but when we talk about cold incapacitation, we're eventually talking about gross motor movements. But hands are very difficult. My hands are useless in the cold too.
Well, that's it. And we've got if I'm in the water and my hands are cold, there's an expectation I'm going to be able to grab hold of these ropes and pull myself up. I'm not even sure I could get,
Yeah. So it's something you should practice. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have a big solution for hands. The problem with hands are you can put mitts on that will keep your hands warm, but you don't have dexterity. And if you have a glove, when you make the insulation thicker, then your hand can move. Like, it's a big problem. There's people who've done huge amounts of research on trying to figure out the magic glove or whatever, and it's very difficult. I hate my hands getting cold. So one, and then two. Yep.
So in this scenario, you're paddling in a group, somebody goes over, the water's very cold, you go into action, you get them back in their boat, and now the consideration is recovery collapse, okay?
Rescue collapse, yeah.
Okay, so do you raft them up and tow them to safety, or do they paddle? Like, do you want
so if they're wearing thermal protective gear, and they've been in the water for a few minutes, then maybe the only thing that's cold is their hands, right? So we've been talking about, the 110-1. It's 110 and 1. If you just fall in and you're not wearing thermal protection, as we established, and if I didn't make the point, I should have. If you're wearing thermal protection, everything, that's like being in warmer water. So everything lengthens out, right? So I would suspect, like when I'm doing various things in the winter using my dry suit, I'm fine. my hands are useless, but the rest of me is fine. So if you're in a group and someone has thermal protection, you should have practiced this enough so that you get that person in the boat before they have a chance to get cold. Like if you're wearing a dry suit with some clothing underneath, it's going to take you a while. You might feel chilled, you might be shivering, but it's going to be a while before somebody actually becomes hypothermic on you.
So club paddles, we're quite strict about thermal protection. However,
Good.
we also go on Wednesday paddles where some people are not quite so strict about thermal protection.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, well, that's something you have to think about and understand, right? So the less thermal protection, the more at risk they are if they dump their boat and all of that. And that might mean having a chat with them, might mean not letting them come, like whatever, right? You've got some information, hopefully you have a little more information now than you had when you came, and that might help some of your decision-making processes. Yeah.
I couldn't help.
Vice President.
I couldn't help but notice that Megan was in the full bloom of youth.
She was.
Isn't everyone here?
Is that just a statement, or was there a question?
Did she get paid well for the job?
My question, of course, is there age related?
Yeah. Yeah. So, of course, few things work as well as you get older, and she would have had the same. She would have had probably the same course of events, just would have happened quicker. If she was older and had some cardiac problems, cardiac disease, then she might have had that. Would have been a different story. But we wouldn't do a demo with someone with cardiac disease, right? We know she's young and healthy. If she's in the water for 2.5 minutes, it's impossible, almost impossible for her to die. So we're okay. But, yeah, absolutely. So we also older. Your ability to thermoregulate decreases as you get older, and don't ask me what the threshold is. It's going to be different for different people, but your ability to shiver and your ability to vasoconstrict might decrease, so you might get colder quicker. Although, as you get older, we tend to put on, accumulate a little fat, which might help go the other way, decreasing our cooling rate. So, and I made sure not to look at anybody as I'm saying. So yeah, we wouldn't do that demo with someone who was 65. For instance. Yeah.
So you get the person out of the water in say 5 minutes. That's probably kind of a long rescue.
Yeah, that like 5 minutes is a long rescue, right?
Yeah,
so that person, if they're wearing thermal protection, before you finish your question, that person should be fine.
Right.
So anyway, go on.
So say the person's not wearing very good thermal protection,
yeah,
or it's leaking and it's soaked. The clothing is soaked. You're back in the boat. Is the hypothermia process continuing at maybe a lesser rate? But you got 20 minutes, you say. Is that person still?
Well, okay. So they're still. So they've got cold water in their suit, but they're in the boat. So that's colder than they would be if there was no water in their suit. So they're going to be, they're losing heat more than they were before they dumped. But they're not going to be hypothermic in half an hour because they've got thermal protection on, even though they have some cold water in there. But they're going to be uncomfortable. They might be shivering and eventually shivering like crazy. But they're going to cool slower, much slower than if they were in the water. Right? I mean, it just makes sense.
So if there's no thermal protection, say they're just thoughtlessly wearing cotton clothes or something, everything is soaked.
Yeah, well, those people, so like in that case, you get them out, get them in their boat and get them to shore, and then we can, somebody was asking the question and I said you're not going to worry about it if they've got thermal protection. So what if they don't? You've come across somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, or it's a Wednesday paddle, and there you go. Some percentage of people don't pay as much attention to that. So right, so you want to get them to shore, if you and try to help them. Don't get if you can tow them or whatever, well, 5 minutes, they should be able to paddle ashore. Okay, so anyway, you get them ashore, and then you've got to take care of them. So you want to, what do you want to do?
Get them out of the wind.
Yeah, get them protected from the wind if there is wind, right? You want to get them out of the elements as much as possible. And then if they're, well, after 5 minutes they should be functional, so you could get them to gently, replace their wet clothing with dry clothing. And if you have any kind of a sleeping bag or anything, or any kind of insulation, this is not the time to have insulation in your boat anymore. You want to get it on that person. Give them a warm chocolate drink. There's no rush to do anything now. You want to make sure this person is well and truly in good shape. So fire up a stove or build a fire, whatever. If you don't have a thermos of warm cocoa or chocolate drink, and get some calories into them, and then just watch them, and you'll be able to tell. Watch them. We say watch them for half an hour. After a 5-minute boat ride like that, you might wait 15 minutes, but you can tell, is somebody getting better or are they getting worse? Like if they're just shivering like crazy after 15 minutes, you're not ready to get going yet. You still have some treatment to do. But if they're getting better, and just note, if they stop shivering, you can stop shivering for 2 reasons, right? One is because you're warming up, and you know what the date is, and you know your name. The other thing is you kept cooling until you couldn't shiver anymore, but that's not going to happen after a 5-minute swim. But you can tell the difference. If they don't know the date, they don't know who they are, and they're not very conscious. Yeah.
So here's the trade-off.
Okay, so you got
the person dump, you rescue them. Okay, in kayaks, you invariably end up with water sloshing around inside.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you've got an inch of that equally cold water in the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you spend the time getting rid of that cold water before you go to shore, or do you?
Oh no, like the shore is 5-10 minutes away, just get to shore.
Most of the time it's not.
Yeah, if you're an hour away, it might take that time.
Middle of the crossing.
But again, sitting in 1 inch of cold water, it's going to give you hemorrhoids, but it's not. It's not going to. You're not going to become hypothermic. Oh, if we'd only taken that inch of water out of the boat, he would have lived. That's not going to be the difference between life and death. It'll be the difference between comfort and discomfort. Okay. Yes.
I thought I remember reading about hypothermia and keeping the victim more horizontal.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right about that?
Absolutely. The 2 number 1 rules, because you don't have a lot of medical equipment with you and you might not have any other things, the things you can do, or work on at least, is treat them gently, don't drag them around, be rough with them, and keep them as horizontal as possible.
Can you tell us a little bit more about why?
Why keep them horizontal?
Yes.
Okay, so if I'm standing up right now, because I'm healthy and I don't have any problems, I'm able to maintain my blood pressure even though I've got a lot of blood flowing through my legs because I'm standing up. Right? If I lay down, I have less blood flowing through my legs. Right? So it's easier for my heart to maintain blood pressure. Right? So if I'm lying down, if I can get down and get up, this is easier when you're Megan's age. So I have some blood flow going through my legs. I'm able to maintain blood pressure pretty simply. Right? So if I stand up, a lot of blood a proportion of my blood volume has moved down, so I have more, none of it's pooling down there. That's an old term, blood's pooling in the legs. Well, it doesn't pool there, but you have a greater portion of blood going through. So now, right now, I have other systems working. I'm vasoconstricting in different places. My heart might be pumping a little harder, and I'm able to maintain my blood pressure. But if I'm cold, and things aren't working as well when I stand up, I can't maintain my blood pressure, and I could do anything from fall down to fainting to having cardiac arrest. Not after 5 minutes, but that's the worst case scenario. So until you're able to watch somebody and look at them and talk to them and determine yes, indeed, this person is not getting worse, they're getting better. They were shivering, now they've stopped shivering, they're feeling good. You can say, okay, well, let's try standing up. And when we say, it doesn't mean let's go for a run. It's, you know, sit up for a while, look at them, okay, good. Can you stand up? Okay, let's walk around a little bit. And, you know, watching them intently to make sure that their condition isn't getting worse. And a 5-minute dump like that, there's no reason that, you know, after a while, there's no reason why you just can't continue on. If you have dry clothing and you can, you know, warm things up, and there's no reason. Yo.
So if you're in the water, do you just stay vertical or you should lay on your back?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the water, how should you be? Basically, what your clothing, the position your clothing puts you in, which is normally lying a little bit backwards. To be vertical, there's nothing wrong with that in the water. Being vertical in the water is okay, because the water pressure is squeezing my legs, forcing the blood back up here. So it doesn't matter whether I'm like this or whether I'm laying backwards, as many suits put you in. The issue is, whatever you're doing to survive for a long period of time, you want to use as little energy as possible. So I've tried, you know, different kinds of things I've worn. It's okay, I'm going to try and be vertical, and I have to really work at it because the suit and everything else makes me want to lie backwards. And so unless you've got waves coming over your head, that's a different story. But then you're struggling no matter what. Then you wish you had bought the suit that had the hood that comes over. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So whether you've heard of the help position, you know, getting up on top of a boat, all of these pieces of advice, whatever it is that you're doing to try and survive longer, you want to do it whatever way, whatever position and whatever it is that you feel that you're using the least energy to do. Like I didn't show the canoe picture here, did I? Me in the canoe. So I did a test on a canoe. So I'm going to get a picture of being on top of the canoe. So there I am, just reaching over the canoe like this. And then I said, but the advice says you should be on top of your boat. So I went to the end and got on my boat. And so two things happened. First of all, I was working like a madman to try and keep sturdy because it's a narrow boat, not like an aluminum boat. And the other thing is, when I looked at the pictures after, when I got on the boat was lower in the water, and the exact same amount of my body was out of the water. Whether I was doing nothing like this or fighting like crazy to be on top of the boat. And so obviously, you know, it's just better to just hang on, because I just draped my arms over it, and it was using no energy. So whatever you're doing, you want to use as little energy as possible. You're pretty smart. Well, most of us are pretty smart. We can fiddle around with different options. You go, yeah, no, there's the sweet spot. I still might be really miserable because I'm in a survival situation, but this is the least miserable position to be in, so that's what you want to do.
So I'm thinking back about Gary's,
One more question.
Gary's
Okay,
Gary's paddling back, getting the person to paddle back or tow them back. Is it counterproductive to get them to paddle back because they're losing calories by paddling?
Yeah, so again, this is all predicated on you're with a group, and somebody who's dumped their boat, if you're there as a group, that person's back on their boat in 5 minutes, right? I got this right, that 5 minutes would be a long time? So 5 minutes, they've still got the same energy stores they had 5 minutes before, so they can paddle to shore no problem. In fact, you might encourage them to, I might have said something a little different earlier, but you might encourage them, okay, paddle hard, that'll help you warm up, right? And get to shore, get to somewhere where you can, well, if they had a dry suit on and there's no water in there, maybe just paddling, like you would just paddle and see what's going on, how are they doing? If they're paddling for 5 or 10 minutes and you notice that buddy's shivering like crazy, well, no, now we have to get to shore. The getting to shore for sure was the scenario where you had the Wednesday paddler who wasn't wearing thermal protection, right? If you fall in the water, like I do this for fun all the time. Right? I have a suit on, I love going for a swim just, you know, from sitting with a group. I'm getting hot, so I'm just getting in the water and go for a swim for 5 minutes. No big deal, right? If your suit leaks, or if it's a wetsuit, that's a little different. You might be a bit colder. But yeah, so you can try just paddling. And if things don't get better, then option paddling with thermal protection, 5 minutes shouldn't be a big deal. 5 minutes without thermal protection, you could be making. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out who's talking there. Good?
So my question is just my personal experience. Either in the beginning of this year or the end of last year, it was a windy paddle. I borrowed Anne's paddle to try it out. And during the lunch time, so I paddle out and I aged a little bit too much. That's why I tip it over. Then I tried to use her paddle to do rolling up, right? Then I feel good. I loaded like almost 10 times. Some of them failed and the majority of them succeeded. However, when I finished afterwards, I paddled back to the beach. It was hard for me to stand up from my car. My leg muscle couldn't listen to my brain instruction. Mm-hmm. So I tried, then falling down. Eventually, I got out of my car. When I was walking on the beach, I still felt a couple of times. That's how quickly. I didn't wear my dry suit, but I didn't rolling. That's my head totally,
You had a dry suit on?
Yeah, I didn't wear my dry suit, but my
did
head,
or did not?
I did. I did wear my dry suit.
Yes.
But my head was in the cold water because of the rolling, right? Then this whole, quickly and severe, the cold water can cause incapacitation. That's my personal experience.
Yeah, it can happen, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so
one more. One more.
There we go. Last question. Bring it home.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Better be good.
It's a little bit different from what other people are talking about, but I was in a situation many moons ago where I was taking a course and I was river kayaking in the Nipnap, and there was snow on the banks. We didn't have dry suits or wet suits, and I went in. And when I went in, I came up, and I can't call it hyperventilating because I couldn't get any air in my lungs. I thought that was kind of a strange term to call it, like I've heard of hyperventilating when people are going, and they're getting air in, but they're going to pass out because
You remember the cop?
too much. What's
When
that?
you remember the cop when he came up, his mouth was open, he couldn't breathe, and he couldn't
Yeah,
move.
that's what I was like.
Yeah, so we might call that, you had a gasp, and then that was it. And there you are.
I didn't get anything. I was sleeping.
Well, the bottom line is
So
a
I just
respiratory
wondered whether
problem,
there's a different
and you
term
can't
for
control
that
your breathing.
kind of breathing.
What?
It's different. I think there should be a different kind of term for that, because you're not hyperventilating when you're not getting any air. But they're called
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Point
That's just
is-
curious. This is
Yeah, sure, we could call it something else.
Yeah.
The bottom line is you can't control your breathing.
Yeah,
And
don't get any air.
eventually you will, if you don't
Yeah.
have it. Okay, so there you go. Hang on. So that is true. That's gasping and hyperventilation may not cover everything, but in the world of public education, trying to get people to remember stuff, the more things you add, the less likely, every time you add a term, you decrease retention by huge percentages. So we can go gasping, hyperventilation, and something else, and then I come up with a fourth thing. So, gasping hyperventilation covers most of the people, most of the scenarios, most of the time, and that's why we'll stick with that. I'm not going to look for another term. Because it's published in too many places and it's not really trying to change it. The point is you have a respiratory problem. You can't breathe properly, and that affects the fact that you can't move properly, and once you can breathe properly, things will get lots better.
I could move. That was the neat
Okay,
thing.
well then you don't even have to worry about it. Why are we even talking about it? That's it.
Before I thank these guys, would everybody who raised their hand who are planning on rushing right home and selling the boats?
Don't do that.
Not one hand, that's pretty good. I mean, this is just so important for us as kayakers in cold water. This is the difference between survival and not survival. And when I saw the first presentation on this topic, I knew I had to ask these guys if they would come over and talk to us, because this is just so important. There's an old sailor's cliche that's doubly true for kayakers, and that is, you don't bullshit the ocean, it doesn't listen. Okay, so to thank these guys, we've got the much sought after, seldom seen Siska mug. And you know how good this is for hot chocolate? It would save a half a dozen lives. Thank you very much, guys.